Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out in the shop, and we've got a good video for you today. And in today's shop, we're gonna be talking all about the basics of fishing frogs. Hollow-bellied frogs. If you ask me of all the kinds of fishing, what is the most exciting, heart-pounding, just adrenaline running type of fishing you could do, it's frogs. It's a bait that gets explosive strikes on top, and it's a bait that you can fish anywhere, right? There's no limits to where you can fish it. So because of those things, right, being topwater and fishing it anywhere, it really is a versatile lure. I think a lot of people assume that frog fishing is only good in the heat of the summer, but a frog is pretty versatile. Like other topwaters, as soon as that water temperature hits the mid-50s, right? 55, 56 degrees, I consider that frog a player. So on the front end, pre-spawn period, when that water's in the mid-50s, this bait can play. During the spawn, during the summer, 100% one of the best times you could fish the frog. And in the fall, that thing is phenomenal. Even as the vegetation's dying, even as the water's cooling, as long as it's at mid-50 or higher, that's going to be a player, right? So super versatile. Let's say, pre-spawn to mid to late fall, that thing's a player. Now, when that water gets cool, if you live in a part of the country where the water gets 50 degrees or cooler, like other top waters, it plays less. It becomes less of a factor. But for all those other times, dude, this is a bad to the bone bait. In this video, we're really going to break down some of the basic elements to frog fishing. We're going to talk about the style of frog. I'm going to show you the 3 types that I fish. We're going to talk a lot about color and keeping it simple. We'll show you a couple modifications, and then we're going to roll into the rod, the reel, and the line, and that's super important as well. But let's start with the style of frog or type of frog to fish. And there's a lot of them out there. But in my frog fishing, just like other lure categories, right? A good analogy would be like with crankbaits or with jigs, right? With jigs, you have football jigs, flipping jigs, swimming jigs, right? And certain jigs are good for certain applications. The same thing in the frog world, okay? And I really have 3 categories or types of frogs that I fish. The first one is, and this is more that traditional nose to the frog. If you look at it, it's not cupped, it's not anything, just a conical style nose. But the first category is a walking style frog, a walking frog, a frog that walks. And this is one by mullocks I've been fishing for a long time, and it's called a sneaky frog, And if you look at this frog, it's actually it's shaped a lot like a stick bait, right? It's shaped a lot like a walking bait. If you fish the jaywalker or a Zara spook style lure, look at that. It has that shape, okay? And it's almost a V shape in the bottom, right? It almost has this keel to it. And because of that shape and the way it's weighted, and I really want to, it shows up better on this light one. So I really want to show you this on what makes a good walking bait is where that weight is positioned. So take a look at that, guys, and you're going to see that along with this elongated body, it has a belly weight that's a little below center, okay? And that belly weight is really, it's going to help it cast, but it's ballast for the frog. So That's really going to help us enable it to walk. And I like to fish this frog, guys, under a lot of different conditions. Open water, sparse vegetation, duckweed, scattered vegetation, under docks, under trees. Like you heard me say in the beginning of the video, but nothing is off limits to this style frog. And the ability to walk it side to side, right? That's the key to a walking frog. The other thing about this particular frog, and if you look again at that big weight a little below center on this sneaky frog, is besides being ballast for it to walk, this is the frog I use as a pushing frog, okay? So you hear a lot about frogs that push, and really what we're talking about is when you're fishing this thing under extreme matted, heavy cover conditions, specifically vegetation, but even trash mats or sawdust mats or any kind of stuff where there's a matted top to it. Duckweed, hydrilla, milfoil. I want a frog that can push. And that weight on that sneaky frog, it walks great, but in a mat, it also pushes and has presence to it, right? It gives it a ability for the fish to find it, even under that mat. Okay, so the first category for me is a walking frog, which in many cases, and for me, is also the frog that I use as my pushing frog, okay? Category number one. Category number two, and this is another staple. Again, a frog isn't just a frog. Category number two, and this is one of my favorites, if I can get it out of the pack, is a popping style frog, okay? Popping style frog. So look at the difference in the noses of that, right? On that walking style frog, it was very slender and conical in the front, and it's going to be able to walk better, right? Because it's got that pointy top, so it walks. But the popping frog has a cupped mouth. If you're familiar with poppers or chuggers, regular treble hook type of chuggers, that's exactly the same mouth. And a popping frog is an awesome style of frog, is its own category, because it's the opposite of a walking style frog, right? With the walking frog, I'm trying to cover a lot of water. I'm trying to fish vast areas where there's no specific target. Yes, walking frog. But what about when you're fishing targets? What about when you're trying to fish the frog slow? In those situations, there's no better frog than a popping style frog. This is a bait by Mullix. This is the Mullix popping frog. It's called the pop frog. The cool thing about this frog is that it splashes and spits, but also you can make it walk subtly. Not like that one, but it does have a little side to side. So for times when I want to fish it slow and keep it in place, this gets the nod, all right? Some examples of that. If I'm fishing a frog around an isolated patch of vegetation, popping frog. If I'm fishing it around an isolated brush pile or treetop, popping frog. If I'm around bluegill beds or fishing bedding bass where I know where those beds are, that one bed, I know where it's at, I want to pop it, leave it in place, and let those skirts just flare, right? That's the popping frog. So isolated cover targets, slow condition, when I want to slow it down. And the last one is when that water gets dirty. When the dirtier the water gets, when the water gets, let's call it heavily stained and muddy, I much rather have a frog that I can fish slow and that makes that popping, spinning sound. Have you ever fished around lily pads or vegetation and you've heard the popping noise? Bluegill popping and sucking on the bottom of the grass, dude, exact sound that the popping frog makes, right? So isolated targets, slower conditions, dirtier water, I want a popping frog. All right, last but not least, and guys, this really, if you're an avid frog angler and you don't have this in your arsenal, add this one to your arsenal. This one came out about, let's call it 6 or 7 years ago, and this is the Mullix Super Natto frog, and it's my final category of frog. And here it goes. You ready, guys? Final category of frog is a buzzing frog, a buzzing style frog. And this one is really the perfect hybrid frog. It's a hollow-bodied frog, just like the other ones, but it has this really innovative soft kicker leg system attached to the back, okay? So this frog is a hybrid style frog in its own category, a category within its own. I want to give you a couple of the reasons that I carry this and why you should have this. It really fills the missing voids for those other two styles, right? Walking, covering a lot of water, making that thing walk, clear water, it's perfect. Calm conditions, a walker. You know, when you want to leave it in place, fish it slow, if that water gets stained and makes some noise, perfect, popping frog. But the buzzing frog fills the gaps, okay? The first gap is wind, is water chop. You know, calm to a light chop is perfect for your traditional frogs. But when that water gets a heavy chop on it, when the water gets windy and wavy, and they can't find the traditional frogs, that's when I go to that buzzer. Guys, it just sounds like a buzz bait. It's got a kind of a propeller sound to it, almost like a whopper plopper choppo sound to it, and it really does still attract fish even in those windy conditions. For sure, heavy wind, I switch to that thing. The second one is situations where you have heavy mats with openings in the mat. And to me, that's the perfect scenario for this frog, because if you look, this buzzing frog has a weight, so it does push a little bit. So I can burn it on the mat, and then when I get to an open hole, I literally just fish it almost just like a jerkbait, like in the open water. And it spits and really attracts fish that are drawn to the sound of that buzzer. All right, last but not least, and we're talking about using a frog during low light or dark conditions. You know, I love to fish a frog at night. I love to fish a frog as the sun is setting or rising. But many times with a traditional walking or popping frog, they can't find it. The great thing about that buzzing frog is because of that noise and that vibration, as you reel it or jerk it, it works both ways, it has a great presence under dark conditions. So the third category, why this should have its own segment, is dark conditions. Early, late, super dark, rainy, cloudy conditions. When rain's hitting the water and they just think these are raindrops, at night, that thing has presence to it. It has sound and it attracts them, okay? So 3 categories of frogs for 3 completely different scenarios. All right, let's get to color. Guys, you're going to see something that is very similar in all these frogs I have in my hand. And here it goes. You ready? In my frog fishing, I keep color selection ultra simple. Ultra simple, guys. Ultra simple. And honestly, I carry like 3 color palettes in my frogs. Going to start with my top two, and this really covers most scenarios. And it is black frog, white frog. Black frog, white frog. And that's it. And I really have some reasoning on why I pick a black frog or a white frog. And here's my scenarios to help guide you in your frog selection. So the first thing is, guys, you don't need 20 colored frogs. A white one and a black one, you're in good shape. I'm going to give you one other one, but you're in pretty good shape. All right, let's start with the black frog. Black frog, to me, excels when the conditions are dark, right? So if it's that early morning that we were talking about, or if it's cloudy or rainy, or it's getting into evening and you're losing your light, I like a dark frog. I like a black frog. And the reason for that is, under dark conditions, a dark frog is a lot of silhouette. So they can hear it, they can see it, but they can't really make it out, right? It's coming over a mat. They look at it. It's the size of a bluegill, a sunfish, a panfish, a baitfish, whatever, right? And it's just that silhouette. So dark conditions with the light, I really prefer a dark frog. The watercolor. When the watercolor is stained to dirty, I prefer a dark frog, In dark water, muddy, chocolate milk, stained, a dark frog is going to have more presence, more silhouette, right? They're going to look up there and see that contrast of that dirty water, and they're going to find it better, okay? So dark sky conditions, muddy water, black frog. The opposite is true for the opposite scenarios, okay? So light conditions while you're fishing. Super high sun, bluebird days, not a cloud in the sky. It's bright out. I prefer a white frog. And again, I'm matching the sky a little bit, right? Maybe that's a good way to describe it. Dark sky, dark frog. Light sky, light frog. And when the sky's bright, they look up, the white kind of silhouettes more, and they can't get a great look at it. About the size of a shad, about the size of an alewife, a herring, yep. And they just see it walking, and they come and eat it, right? So light conditions, bright conditions, white frog. And then water clarity, guys, you ready? Same thing. Clean water, ultra clear water, up to lightly stained water, I prefer a white frog, okay? The last thing on the white and black frog is I do think about what they're eating naturally. So I have a tendency, if they're eating more white-bellied forage, if it's a shad or a frog with a white belly, I have a tendency to go to the whites. If they're eating darker forage, dragonflies, dark snakes, bluegills, right? I tend to go to the darker frog. All right, the last category, and this is one that I really like, is a frog with yellow in the belly. A bluegill colored frog or a frog colored frog that has some yellow, some green. What I'll do too, guys, is I'll even take an orange Sharpie or an orange spike-it pen and put a little orange throat on that bottom of that bait. And when I know specifically they're feeding on bluegill, having some yellow or orange in there can help. If you're fishing around the bluegill spawn, if you're fishing around bedding fish, that's a great color as well. So white, black, and bluegill colored. That's all you need. Okay, I want to get into just lightly three modifications that I make to my frogs. Almost every frog that I pull out of the pack, I do this to, okay? So let's use, we're going to use the Mullix popping frog as an example. And when you pull the Mullix frog out of the pack, it's got these little keepers to help keep the skirt nice. I pull those off. And almost every frog, I don't care what brand you get, the skirts are long. They're long! And I don't want a frog with ultra long legs. Like, honestly, that's like 3-4 inches of legs. So the first thing that I do when I get my frog is I want to cut these legs down. I got to find a scissors here for you guys. Let me get a scissors real quick. All right, sorry about that. All right, so I like to cut the length of my frogs down. But when I cut them, I don't want to cut straight. Like if I was Shaw Grigsby or Jimmy Houston giving myself a haircut. I'm not going to cut straight on those legs. I'm going to cut on an angle. So I like to cut like, you know, kind of like quarter cut it, right? On an angle facing down. And you want to do it from the opposite direction on either side, okay? So I'm going to start on the right side. I'm going to take about, let's call it about 1.5 to 2 inches off those legs. And I'm going to do it on the left side. And remember, I'm cutting down. And what I'm doing is I'm giving that skirt, because now that skirt's on an angle, I'm giving it extra dimension. So even though the legs are shorter, as it's walking or popping or sitting still, you're going to have better movement and kind of more movement because the skirt's angled, okay? So I'm cutting my skirt. Next thing I'm going to do is, guys, I don't care what brand of frog you have. It could be the hardest in the world. It could be the softest in the world. Mullix frogs are pretty darn soft. But I'm always going to get a pliers, and I want to pull those hook points off the body. The easiest way to do that is grab your needle nose, go to the bend of the hook, and just be careful not to mash the barb down. But go to the bend of the hook and just put just a little upward pressure on it. Go on to the bend of the hook, little upward pressure. And if you look on both of those arms now, I've taken those points and pulled them just a little off of the body. Your hookup percentage will go way up, and that frog is just as weedless and snagless as it was before you did that. So I'm always pulling the hooks off the body just a little. Last but not least, and this one, guys, if you're watching this, this is more for the scenario where you're fishing and it's dark, or the water's dirty, or you're fishing a heavy mat where sound becomes more important. I'm going to add a tube jig rattle to this frog. Go to your favorite tackle store, Tackle Warehouse. They have these big, large tube rattles, big, large rattles called a tube rattle. And you can hear that right there, guys. Listen to that. Just a knock to it. And it's easy to put in. I just wet it. And when I wet it, I pull back the body from that double-pronged frog hook. There's what it looks like gone halfway in. And I just finish pushing it inside the body. So now you've got that same rattle in the frog. And it's even louder because it's banging against the hook. It's adding a little weight, help you push a little more. And it's helping those fish find the frog. So there's my 3 modifications to frogs. And last, but definitely not least, we have to talk about the rod, the reel, and the line when you're frog fishing. If there's one thing I see guys do wrong, anglers, the one mistake I see anglers make when they're frog fishing is not using the right rod, reel, and line. So let's talk about that. Okay, on the rod, we want to use a longer rod let's call it 7.2 to 7.6. I use a 7.4. To me, a 7.4 is the perfect length. But here's the key. You ready? I think you assume because you're using a frog, often you're fishing it around heavy cover, that you have to use a heavy action rod. Not true! Don't do that. Use a 7.2 to 7.6. This is a 7.4. Medium heavy. Medium heavy. So you actually want a little bit of tip in that rod, right? Look at that. It's got a little bit of tip. This is an Abu Garcia Ike series. The way that I like to talk about it is this rod's like 70-30. About 30% of the top of this rod has a little flex, right? That's it, right to about there. But 70% of it, backbone, right? Medium heavy action. And that tip, that little bit of flexibility, that's going to help us cast this frog. It's going to help us walk or pop or buzz this frog, right? Because the tip loads as you move your rod tip. It's going to walk. I can walk this way better when I have a medium heavy action tip, right? And last but not least, this is the big one. Hear me out on this, guys. It adds a little delay to the hook set. Frog fishing is the most heart-pounding, exciting thing. And even when you pause, and you should, right? You're walking that bait, and you see, you should wait, feel, and if you feel it, jam them, right? That's the hook set that I use. I walk or I pop, and when I hear the explosion, I pause, and I just start to come back a little bit. If I feel the fish on, I continue that. Well, with a medium heavy tip, it adds a little delay and sort of lets the fish get it before it hits that 70%, right? And that helps slow you down on the hook sets. I cannot tell you how important that is. If this was a heavy action rod, the fish blows on it. I do the same thing. I wait a little, I go back, but often it's such a stiff rod that I pull it away from him. So 7.2 to 7.6 medium heavy. Try that 7.4. Next thing is the reel. Whatever your favorite casting reel is, as long as it has a fast gear ratio. And the number one reason for a reel with a fast gear ratio when you're fishing frogs is to catch up with the fish and to get him out of the cover, right? To move that fish, to move him away from the cover he's living in. So I really recommend 7-1 at the slow end and higher. In fact, an 8-1 or 8-3 is the right reel for frog fishing because you want speed. Not necessarily to work the bait, but to reel in your slack and get into them and to move the fish away from the cover. Okay? So fast gear ratio reel. And last but not least, you hear me talking so much about the line types and when fluorocarbon is great and when mono is great. But guys, for these three, we are always going to use straight braid. Clear water, straight braid. Dirty water, straight braid. Open water, straight braid. Mats, straight braid. Always straight braid. And I really prefer 40 or 50 pound green braid. That's what I prefer. This is Berkley X5. It's a 5 carrier braid. It's super soft. If the cover is the nastiest jungle cover you've ever seen, will occasionally go up to 65. But that lighter braid, 40 or 50, you're going to get longer cast. It's just going to be easier to walk and work the lure. And listen, you're not going to break 40 or 50 pound braid. Trust me. Not if you do the right thing. So 40 or 50 pound braid, straight to the frog. It's a reaction bait. Guys, they've got their eye on the movement, the push, the pop, the buzz. They don't see the braid. That's the line you want to use with frog fishing. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this shop. This was a long one, trying to really flush out the basics for you on frog fishing. Remember, all year long, from pre-spawn to late fall, this is a big player. June, July, August in the summertime, it's the absolute deal. Try frog fishing if you haven't. If you've already been doing it, use some of those tips, and I guarantee you're going to catch more fish. Guys, I hope you're enjoying what you're hearing. If you like these shop videos, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, subscribe to my channel. If you're already a subscriber, tell your friends about Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. If they subscribe, they're going to get a notification with a new video dropping every single week. Try those tips, tie on a frog, and catch a big bass. Bye, guys. Hey, everybody, Mike Iaconelli out in the shop. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, you have to check out that one, and I hope you like them.